Greetings! Welcome to session 5 of the Emerald Choral Academy. I am Scott Kovacs, this is session 6 of the Emerald Choral Academy. I am Scott Kovacs, Executive Director of the Emerald Ensemble, a professional choir based in Seattle. Before we begin, the Emerald Ensemble would like to acknowledge that we gather on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, who are still here, and we honor with gratitude the land itself and the life of the Duwamish tribe. The Emerald Choral Academy is a series of interactive webinars during which our area's leading professional choral singers will reveal their personal tricks of the trade to community singers. These webinars are then made available freely to singers across the world via the internet. The Emerald Ensemble is very grateful to our generous donors who have made this project possible, particularly the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture and For Culture. We encourage anyone participating or viewing this webinar to make a donation as you are able at emeraldensemble.org. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel and join our mailing list to hear about future sessions of the Academy and the other activities of the Emerald Ensemble. We'll post links to the donation page and our YouTube channel in the chat in just a few moments. This webinar is being recorded. By participating, you are granting the Emerald Ensemble permission to share in your contribution. Please ensure that your microphones and cameras are turned off for the duration of the presentation. You can ask questions to the presenter by typing it into the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. We'll pause periodically to field your questions. There will also be a designated Q&A period at the end of the presentation. And you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen as well. We'll be monitoring both. As you all know, technology can be a fickle thing, so please bear with us if we experience technical difficulties during the presentation. After today's presentation, you'll receive a link to the video replay of this session, along with a link to the PDF of the slides. You can also view past sessions and download materials from all our past ECA classes at www.emeraldensemble.org. This session's instructor is the Emerald Ensemble's inimitable artistic director, Dr. Gary D. Cannon. Gary is one of the most active conductors/musicologists in our area. In addition to directing the Emerald Ensemble, Gary also leads the Vashon Island Choral and the Cascadian Choral. You've probably read his program notes, which are included in the programs of many prominent Seattle musical institutions, including Choral Arts Northwest and the Seattle Symphony, where you might catch one of his pre-concert lectures. He's also a pretty fine tenor, and I can say that because I'm his voice teacher, and has sung professionally throughout the Pacific Northwest. His topic today is what conductors really do. I'm actually very much looking forward to hearing this from my good friend Gary Cannon. And with that, it's a great pleasure to introduce to you Gary Cannon.
Thank you, Scott. This is it's an exciting time to be able to tell what really has been going on in my brain as a conductor for these last oh wow, every once in a while I do this math. 30 years? 27 years or something I've been wow, that's a lot of arm waving. Let's do some share screening here. Oh, I can do that once I remember how. We should be seeing everything there. Okay, good. So what conductors really do, there you have my name and things. When Scott and I first started talking about what this particular presentation would be like, one of the ideas that we bandied about was that I could just sit back in an armchair with a glass of scotch and just talk. I'm not going to do that, though. Instead, I have chosen, for better or worse, to structure this thought. And hence, I really call this now what conductors really do. And it's not going to the next slide. What conductors really do. Is it still not going to the next slide? Okay, what have I done? Maybe I have to click here. There we go. What conductors really do, a love story. This is a story of when a conductor meets a piece of music and then eventually the conductor and piece of music get all the way to the concert, about the deepening of their relationship and how that unfolds. That's my goal, at least, and we'll see how well this metaphor does or does not hold up at each step along the way. First, though, a bit of levity, because why not? This is courtesy of the Florida Grand Opera, as you can see. You remember all these memes? They were popular, what, 10, 12 years ago or something like this? What does a conductor really do? Well, my friends think I'm Bugs Bunny. The next panel there, my mom thinks that I hobnob with the greats. Actually, I think my mom thinks I'm Bugs Bunny, but that's okay too. What musicians think I do, this graph is perhaps more accurate to instrumentalists than singers, I dare say. What society thinks I do. If you Google for conductor, was it what a conductor does meme in order to find things like this, you will find far more about train conductors than about orchestra and choir conductors. What I think I do, this is accurate, of course. We conductors are leading our forces into the fray. Sometimes your force is the cat who walks next to you on the table, especially during Zoom rehearsals. But we are bravely moving on. But the reality, I think, as you'll see, is what I really do. And it's a little bit of, no, wait, altos, don't do that. Tenors, you're supposed to do that. No, okay, wait, we need to move this chair here. I got to get this little program note, this bit of marketing out. And so there really is a lot of just jostling of things that happen. There we go. So meeting the music. The conductor meets the music for the first time. It's like you were at a party or a gathering of some kind, and you see that person across the room and you first say hello. And there are many different ways in which conductors can encounter music for the first time that eventually they may go on to choose to perform. One of the major sources is other performances. We attend each other's concerts. I don't know how many concerts I've sat in and heard a piece of music and thought, I want to do that piece of music, or something like that. Recordings, I still buy a lot of recordings. I don't know how many folks in the world still do. Nowadays it's all streaming, and sometimes the radio still exists, though in choral music, not many radio stations play a lot of choral music in general. Other ways that we encounter music for the first time is we get suggestions from singers. I keep a Word document that has all of the pieces that any singers in a choir I conduct have recommended. They're all listed, and who recommended them, which means if 2 or 3 people start requesting the same piece, then I know I'd better do that pretty darn quick. Sometimes you get suggestions from audience members or other supporters, and sometimes surprises can come well when a composer will reach out to you with a work, especially of their own. One of my favorite composers here in Seattle, Greg Bartholomew, he gave me just a random cold call email about 14 years ago, and I still do his music periodically. When I was in graduate school, I sang in a recording session for another local composer, David Hahn, and then he told me about this other piece he had written, so I decided to program it on my master's recital, and I did another one on my doctoral recital. And I think I've performed almost every piece of choral music he's written and premiered all but 2 of those, something like that, including a big cycle with the Emerald Ensemble, was that last year, 2 years ago? So there are many different ways and different people who offer different recommendations, which means a conductor is receiving so many different suggestions, it is absolutely impossible to do all of them. It would take 5 times as many concerts in a season. And of course, the conductor will meet music through their own training and their own youth of one sort or another. They may have sung a piece in a choir on their own or heard it when they were younger. Some conductors, myself included, do quite a bit of their own research. I'm an aficionado of early and mid 20th century British music. So this last summer, I ordered from England every piece that was possible to order by Elgar Perry in Stanford. I had a few of the scores, but not everything. And now I have a whole bunch of music that I really should go through someday that was part of my own research. And the last on the list, but certainly not the least in most conductors' experiences, is we all attend conferences, particularly, of course, America or the American Choral Directors Association, where there are scores handed out to you at different times. You can purchase scores from people, and there are performances as well. So very often it's a trading of minds of repertoire. So you've met this person, but you still have to go through the process of deciding why to date them, right? Why to pursue this future possibility. So why does a conductor choose to program a particular piece? These reasons that I'll go through here all interweave. It's like this massive Venn diagram. Um, One, of course, is they have to assess the piece on their own. Sometimes you fall in love with the piece immediately. Sometimes you think, wow, I kind of like that. I'm interested in learning more about it. Or sometimes it's just something you admire or appreciate about the piece. Might be as simple as, wow, somebody has set this particular text to music and I really like that text. So you want to get to know it better. Sometimes the consideration, or I should say, another major factor in these considerations is regarding the choir itself. It's important to reflect upon whether the choir will enjoy the act of singing it and rehearsing it for usually weeks and weeks. There are some composers too, like John Rutter, who composes in such a way that he helps the choir sound good. I'm not a huge fan of all of his music. There are very few pieces of his that I've actually fallen in love with, as I phrased it earlier, but just about any John Rutter piece will help the choir to sound at its best. So I perform a fair amount of his. Sometimes the piece will be good for their training. For example, if you want to teach them how to do a four-part counterpoint, four-part fugue or something like that. Maybe this fugue is a particularly good one, you think, for your choir. Perhaps you want to teach them a different language. If your choir is not used to singing in German much, for example, then give them the Brahms Requiem, because it's relatively little text for a major work. And it so happens that that text poses relatively few dictionish problems. I'll stick with that. Sometimes then you're already working, crafting on a concert program, and you're looking for that one piece that has to fit a particular hole in that program. And sometimes you encounter that, and that might be the major reason you do the piece. It's like it's a 4-minute long piece about an ash tree, and you've got a whole thing with different kinds of trees, and it's time to do this ash tree. Hooray, hooray, it's a piece about an ash tree. Other factors include the fact that the audience will like it. Sometimes you just want to program something chocolatey that you know will be liked right away. Sometimes someone else will have requested it. That sometimes, as I kind of mentioned earlier, that alone can be a reason to perform the piece. And also whether a work is historically noteworthy. There are pieces that are, for example, there are pieces like the Talus, If You Love Me, or Victoria o Magnum Mysterium, these great standards of Renaissance music that are being performed less and less now. And so I have chosen some of those historically noteworthy, awesome pieces because a lot of the singers in the choir haven't actually sung them. I'm preparing the If You Love Me right now, for example. So then let us say that this conductor and the piece of music have met. So far, they've hit it off at that first little conversation, and you decide that you might want to see them again. Maybe not in something as formal as a dating arrangement, though. You want to run into them at a concert or at a friend's birthday party or something. I don't know how these things work really well, and so you have to. In doing so, you're kind of crafting a new concert program. This is where my metaphor is at its weakest. I acknowledge that, and yeah, there we go. There are musical considerations and there are practical considerations. Both are comparably important in the life of an organization like a choir. When you're creating a program, first of all, if it's long enough for the whole concert, maybe an hour of music, then good, you're done. You can walk away with it and not worry any further. There are so many magnificent pieces, though, that will fit maybe half a concert. So then there are other options. One is to find a partner piece, which would be the other half of the concert. Sometimes you do that. I'll talk about contrast and unity later too. There are many different reasons you might choose them. Not too long ago, I was premiering about a half-an-hour long work by who was a local composer, Abraham Kaplan. He's now in Baltimore, and a piece called the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. And I decided to program the piece, and the challenge was what to do with the other half. And I thought of and asked if he would approve of the Haydn's Lord Nelson Mass. And immediately he said, it's a great idea, and I agreed. They both have this kind of interplay between sacred and secular in different ways. They both are very pleasing to the ear. One is more dance-like, one is more presentational. So they really complemented each other effectively. Sometimes when you have a half work or half concert work, you find it wise to compile another half out of shorter works. And then the question becomes, what exactly do you do with that longer piece? It can be the first half intermission and then the shorters for the second half. You can reverse that, start with a bunch of appetizers, have an intermission, and then do a main course. Or every once in a while, it's suitable to put the big piece in the middle. In conducting a few years ago the Christmas cantata by Honegger, for example, the way that it begins and the way that it ends lend itself not really effective, or so I thought, to either of those being the half on its own, even though it's about 25 minutes of music. So we positioned it differently, so it was about 2/3 of the way and closed with other things. And it ended up working fantastically. It was exactly the right way for that organization and that audience to hear that piece. So these are some of the considerations that a conductor has to take in mind. There's the overall question, though, too, of how long can the concert be? And there are two parts of that. One is how long can the audience sit there? And the other is how long can the choir last? Fortunately, I think the latter tends to be sufficiently a deciding factor, at least for choirs, at least for community choirs in particular. Generally, I find that I program between 50 and 65 minutes of actual music. Now that means you'll start a little late because that happens, and that's fine. And there will be talking here and there, and there's time to walk around maybe, and you'll have an intermission, and it'll end up being about an hour and 40-minute experience for the audience. They have felt that they've received their money's worth, and an artistically satisfying event, even if they've only heard perhaps 50 minutes of music. And the reasoning why you might want only 50, I can get into in a moment when we talk about practical considerations. When you are putting together shorter works into a larger program or a larger half of a program, there are enough variables in play and enough examples I could give to last several hours. So I'll just touch on three of the most common issues. One is you want a degree of contrast, but you also want a degree of consistency. If you're just jumping back and forth between different sound worlds, it won't feel coherent. Very often, a trick that I use for this is I think of a concert as a large symphony. So I'll start with something big-ish, like the first movement of a symphony. Then either might be the soft bit, the second movement, then perhaps a lighter scherzo when we come back from intermission, and then a kind of grand finale section. And each of these groupings, as I have phrased them, might be 2 pieces or it might be 4 pieces. It all varies on the pieces themselves and how they interlink. Also, a lot of concerts these days have some kind of thematic unity. Usually it has something to do with the text. Like I mentioned earlier, you might have a whole concert that's all about trees and you want different kinds of trees that are talked about. Oh, that's great. Or different animals, or tell a particular music from Boston of a particular period, for example, might be noteworthy. Some kind of something that unifies it intellectually, not just sonically. And in putting all of these pieces into an actual order, there are so many variables. I wish I had done it right every time in my life. And sometimes conductors will put off putting together an order until relatively the last minute. They've just chosen the pieces. I generally recommend that. I think relatively few conductors do that nowadays, at least for community choirs, independent choirs. There's this notion of, as I say, weaving together from one piece to the next. And this is part of that process of kind of getting to know that piece of music that you have developed an interest in. You have to get to know them to figure out how they might fit into your life, perhaps. The practical considerations also come into play. You know, if you want to date somebody, but they live across the country, that might be a challenge, unless it's the era of Zoom. Some of the practical considerations in choosing music and creating the program are the following. There's certainly have to take into account the difficulty in learning the piece, and there are different aspects of that. One is the difficulty of vocal production itself. Can this particular group of singers handle this particular vocal technique challenge? The example I was thinking of this is one choir I direct. For several years, they really struggled, the sopranos struggled with singing above an F. It was just difficult for them. So when we did the Mozart Coronation Mass, which has, a few dozen high Gs for the sopranos, we really worked hard on the technique that would be required to sing that note well. Because they had to sing it well a whole lot of times. And by the time we got to the concert, they sounded beautifully on those notes. And to this day, they sing the Gs just fine. So it was a matter of my assessing the difficulty, but also figuring out how to overcome that. But we'll get to that. One factor is determining the available rehearsal time. If you only have 5 weeks or 12 weeks, how would you plan that out? And part of that equation is assessing the total difficulty level of an entire concert. So you may have pieces that you think, this is going to be a little challenge for the choir, but they can do it. Unfortunately, if you fill a whole concert with those pieces, then you're creating different issues. So I mentioned that Hanukkah Christmas cantata has some very difficult aspects for the choir. So around it were some pretty easy stuff, some audience sing-alongs for carols, some shaker arrangements that were pretty easy to sing and easy on the ears as well. The other big practical consideration is money. A choir is a business. A nonprofit organization is still a business. They still have to have a bottom line and have to earn money, and they still have to budget. So when you have budgets for instrumentalists, for external soloists, to purchase the scores, those are the kinds of things that when you're looking at the piece of music, deciding whether to program it, that you have to take into account. I bet we're ready for questions.
We really have one question so far, but it's a good one.
Right.
So what about educational consideration in programming? Are you educating audiences with the decisions that you make as a conductor?
Yes, you have to be careful with that. And here's where we get into philosophies as much as practical considerations. If you're preaching at the audience for anything in particular, then you may be treading on particular water. There are certain exceptions. One piece that I have wanted to do for 20 years and never found, actually it's out of print and I couldn't find scores most recently, that's about traditions of the Salish Indians, say the native tribes, the Salish peoples. And it's a beautiful piece of music, about 40 minutes long, and it presents its educationalism very effectively and respectfully. It was written by a Salish composer, if I remember correctly. So it depends upon the piece, but yes, that's a great variable to have in mind.
And I might point out that sometimes we program specifically to educate. And, in the case of the focus events that the Emerald Ensemble Quartet goes out and does, we do program to share often or to educate our audiences, and we do that by actually talking about the music that we're performing. That's one way we handle that.
Oh, certainly, yeah. I think it's important to educate the audience about the pieces that you're performing. I guess I was thinking the question more along the lines of, do you choose the piece of music with an educational bent immediately? And it is another variable in play, not one I always do all the time, but some do more than others.
And I would also add that advocacy, especially with regard to like the Salish piece. I mean, as we as choral directors have made a much needed effort to program more not dead white composers, and in particular minority composers, as we consider our programs. that kind of advocacy is also part of the programming. We've had two more questions since. Stephanie wants to know more about the Salish piece. Stephanie, we'll see if we can get that information out in due time.
For some reason, I can't remember the title of it. I remember the composer was Peter Bering, Berring, though he formerly spelled his name with a BJ. Song of the Salish, something. No, I wish I remembered. I
I'll
have it
see
in
if
my
I can.
list.
I'll see if I can find it. And then we had another excellent question. What about the performance venue's impact on music selection?
Yes. Um, um, that can go in many different ways. For example, if you have a venue with great different locations, you might choose to do a piece that plays with double choir. You have two groups in different locations. Sometimes you have to deal with acoustical considerations. Remember doing performance at St. Mark's Cathedral with several different choirs once, and hearing some of the choices were kind of didn't just jumbled up in that room. So I tried to make sure that we choose music that harmonically flowed in such a way that it would still sound good even in a reverberant space. Renaissance polyphony does particularly well at that, for example. You have to take into consideration, for better or worse, the size of the stage if you want to do a piece with orchestra. I have on several occasions reorchestrated pieces of music, and in order to make just so that we can have the ability for them to fit in the available square footage. I'll talk more about venues later when we get into the concert week changes, but there are certainly variables in play with a venue. Yeah. Okay, so you've kind of met this person a couple times. You've gotten to know them a little bit. The conductor has with this music. Moving on, the next thing you might do is talk to some friends about this. I'm thinking of dating this person. I'm thinking of asking so-and-so out. What do you think? Well, the conductor's equivalent to that is talking to the board very often. The board, many of the conductor's responsibilities deal with interaction with the board. So I want to make sure that body gets important note. The board is officially the governing body. If you think the conductor is in charge of the choir, you're wrong. The board is. The board has hired the conductor to do a particular task. The board holds legal responsibility for the organization. They hold regular meetings, some groups as monthly or quarterly or somewhere between those two. The conductor generally attends those and generally has one or more aspects to present. Officially, though, the conductor is not on the board. They're ex officio, they're a non-voting member. The principal responsibilities of the board I kind of group them into these three areas, and the conductor in different choirs will have different tasks or responsibilities in each of these various areas. In the field of development, the conductor can be involved in the fundraising. For example, in grant applications, the conductor might write the paragraph descriptions of the project for which the organization is hoping to gain funds, while the treasurer does the monetary aspects and while somebody else does statistical analyses, but the conductor might still be involved in all of that. Often the conductor writes material for marketing. Sometimes the conductor is more directly involved in the marketing. They might do the email newsletter or be in charge of the website or things like that also. And in outreach, the conductor always has to be involved in trying to recruit more audience members, recruit more singers, all of these kinds of tasks, getting the word out and being the public voice in a way of the organization. On the subject of management, the conductor is inevitably involved in the budgeting process. Even if they don't officially sit on the budget committee, they will be submitting easily half of the numbers to that committee to reconcile, because the conductor is the one who will know how much the orchestra is going to cost or how much these scores cost. They've probably already researched that. And similar variables. As for the logistics of side of management, That's where the conductor might be involved in communicating with the venue, or in ordering the scores, or in making sure that the venue will have sufficient music stands available. Any number of options there. I say hiring there, particularly in two areas. One, hiring people for specific events, hiring if you have hired instrumentalists or hired soloists from outside the choir. They're responsible for that. There's also the aspect of hiring people who have a deeper relationship with the organization. People like the rehearsal pianist, or if you have an assistant conductor, sometimes the section leaders may be paid, and it's the conductor's responsibility to see how all of that works and to oversee those employees or contractors, depending how the situation may be. The conductor has less involvement with the board's responsibility of stewardship. As far as financial and legal oversight is concerned, sometimes the conductor will have more experience than much of the board, excuse me, about legal matters and financial matters, but usually that tends to fall in the purview of the board as part of the board's legal responsibility toward the organization. But conductor still gets roped in, and that's fine. So you've asked your friends about whether they think you should start dating this person, perhaps. So you start to you have the first date and you plan it out, right? You're gonna meet the person at their house, or at another place, and you're gonna go to dinner, maybe a movie or a concert or some other event. And each date you have to plan in advance. Well, have to. I don't know. I guess not. You don't have to. Every rehearsal, however, you really have to, or really should. It is possible for a conductor, a conductor who knows the repertoire and knows the choir well, to just wing it. That's rare. My personal rule of thumb is that a great rehearsal will take about as much time to plan as the rehearsal itself takes. So if you have 2 hours of rehearsal, probably plan at least 2 hours to plan plan the rehearsal out. It doesn't always work out that way, and there are many different circumstances where it may take more time or less time. I find, for example, that, and I can talk about that later, that's better in the next slide. So as far as putting together each rehearsal is concerned, most conductors will start with some kind of vocal technique lesson, a group lesson, essentially. This group vocal technique lesson is sometimes called warm-ups. And warming up the musculature of the voice is only one aspect of that, which I kind of don't like the idea of warm-ups, but you got to teach vocal technique. Most conductors, the warm-ups will be 10 to 15 minutes. Many do only 3 or only 5. I have been known to go to 20, and sometimes people like that, and sometimes people don't. It depends on the choir. The procedure which I follow for warm-ups, and I know I'm not the only one who does, is I start with something that's posture related. It might be stretching or bending or reviewing of how to hold the body, because people have been sitting at their computers all day long, many of them. Then from there, with the body relatively set, you go to a breathing exercise to go from the whole body to this whole section of the body as a subset. Then I'll sing low to help these muscles kind of relax as they're singing. Then I'll sing high-ish. I'm of the philosophy that it's not necessary to sing as high as the choir is going to sing in that rehearsal. There are conductors who believe that, and that's fine. Then from there, you can do special elements like exercises that involve tuning or vowel adaptation or matching vowels, listening to vowels, or resonance or dynamics. I love doing warm-ups that involve with dynamics, interestingly, or phrasing, or any number of other musical aspects. Now, the key to this is when you first sit down to the meal, as it were, together with the date, when you first come to the repertoire, it's important to blend the vocal technique exercises into the repertoire. Perhaps the first piece you'll rehearse then is something that they know pretty well, and now you're going to do a twist with it, like sing it only on vowels, or sing it only on mezzo piano, or only staccato, or these different kinds of things. So it becomes a vocal exercise as well. So it helps to smooth that process along. Then over the course of the rest of the evening, whether the evening be the rehearsal or the date in this metaphor, the methods to teach music vary wildly. People have doctorates in this field, so I'll give just a few, very few hints. For example, in teaching pitches, sometimes you just have to play through the music and have them sing it back. Doing that for each of all four parts can be very cumbersome. So in those cases, I try to find a duet of sorts. Often it's the sopranos and altos, the top, and then you might do the tenors and basses next. But very often it's helpful to do the sopranos and the basses together. You have your harmonic foundation and your melody, and they support each other in the way that they can learn. And then you do the altos and tenors in the middle. This way doesn't work with all music. For example, if the altos and tenors go back and forth above and below each other a lot, then this isn't the best way to go about it. But it can be helpful in some music. Another option I like to use is just sopranos and tenors, the high voices, and then altos and basses, just the lower voices. Often they'll be harmonically supportive. Sometimes they have the same music or briefly. And you can do things in different orders and mix it up, blah, 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 blah. It's especially helpful to group parts if they are doing something rhythmically similar. As for rhythm, many different ways of teaching it: clapping, counting. Some of that will be prepared before rehearsal, some not, perhaps. The conductor might say rhythm on this piece, and that'll be what they have in their notes. And then they get there and figure out which way they think would be most effective. As for diction, most conductors, I think, use approximants in English when you're learning a different language. Some will use the International Phonetic Alphabet, which I love. I don't use it all the time myself, though, I admit. And we had a presentation on that last fall you may enjoy. And I list it last because it's the thing I perhaps feel least qualified to do, but I still do it a whole lot, and that is teaching the choir vocal technique. The physics and the biology of how to sing more effectively. That's the date. That's the rehearsal. Let's see. Okay. Do you want to ask more questions?
I'm going to split this question into two, though.
Cool.
What are some tips toward keeping the choir members motivated? And I'll just give you the second half. And to appreciate the music selection prior to performance.
Those actually questions lead well into the next slide. So I'm tempted to go to that and answer them as part of that.
As you will, sir.
Keeping them motivated. As for keeping them motivated over the course of one night, like one rehearsal, a lot of it is just making sure that not too much time passes, but going one to the next. If you've been rehearsing just the tenors and basses for 12 minutes, and conductors do this sometimes, then the sopranos and altos will be bored. Even if you tell them things like, be sure you're going through your part at the same time, the mind will drift and you'll lose them. So it's a matter of planning ways to go back and forth to keep everyone engaged. As for getting them to like the piece, that's a poorly phrased paraphrase. What was the exact phrasing of the second question?
All right, so I'll read the question exactly. What are some tips toward keeping the choir members motivated and appreciate the music selections prior to the performance?
Okay, appreciate the music selection. So yeah, how to get them to like it in one way or another. I'm not too far off. Part of that has to do with how you plan all of the rehearsals as an arc. And it's so that you build in bit by bit this appreciation for the music. Different conductors do different things in this regard. I'm kind of mostly talking about my own philosophies. In a way, this is like you're going on multiple dates with the individual in question, with the piece of music, and you're deepening that relationship. You're getting to know them better and getting to appreciate them better, both as a conductor or as a singer. The goal when you're planning through all the rehearsals, whether it be 5 rehearsals or 13, is that gradually you're trying to get less and less about musicianship, things like getting the notes right, and more about like musicality of the phrasing of it and what exactly is going on within the music. You could say the first bit of that, the musicianship, is the how. How do you make the music? And then the second, the musicality, is about the why we're doing this piece in the first half. At the beginning of a whole rehearsal arc, a lot of people, myself included, like to sight read through the music. It's harder for some choruses than others. I have found that the more I've sight read with choirs who struggled with that, the better they get over the years. Certainly not from one night to the next, but that's okay. Sometimes you might, though, hold a particularly difficult piece in reserve for week 3 or 4 that you can do bit by bit. As you're progressing through the rehearsals, it's important for a conductor, I think, to take notes on what was accomplished each week. I do that by having a lesson plan. I plan mine out with 5-minute increments of what I'm going to do. And of course, it's flexible. But as the rehearsal goes along, I have to put X's or cross things through if I didn't get to that, or if I did something else instead. And that's all fine. Also during that time is a good time as you're teaching about the text, for example, and connecting the singers with the text, or showing or demonstrating the cleverness of the composer. Look at this 4-part canon or something like that. And that's part of what you're talking about, of helping the singers to appreciate or enjoy the music. Is finding aspects of the piece that are enriching. About halfway to 2/3 of the way through rehearsal arc, I think it's very important, and here we go into again my personal philosophy more than what all conductors necessarily do. It's important to reassess. You kind of have to just stop and create a new starting point in your mind of where we're rehearsing from. The way I like to do that is through what I call a run-through rehearsal, where we run through the entire concert in concert order, nonstop if you can, within individual pieces. And sometimes I go so far as to, after each piece, we'll stop entirely and everybody sits down and everybody, including myself, takes notes right away. So it's a way to clean the slate of what the past was like and to focus on that moment's rehearsal and then be able to move forward. And sometimes I find singers are taking more notes than I do. And sometimes, each person in the choir has written 1 or 2 things and I'm writing my 8th. So I have a shorthand that I use for it. But it's a helpful tool. And if any conductors are out there, feel free to steal this idea. As you get closer to the concert, it's important to be ready early. Too many singers tend to approach, okay, here's the concert date. I have 8 weeks till the concert. And when really what we should be thinking is, I have 6 weeks before I should have it pretty darn tootin' ready. And then we'll still refine it as we get closer to the concert.
You do have one question about the prior. How do you balance time spent warming up, which improves the ability to learn and sing in a given rehearsal, with the actual time available to rehearse?
I have 2 answers to that. One is that the philosophical answer is, and this is the answer Scott's going to like, is that there is no difference between them. When you're teaching the music, you're also teaching the vocal technique. When you're teaching the vocal technique, you use the repertoire as the tool through which to teach. So that's the right answer. The other answer, the actual answer, what conductors really do, is, and I'm exaggerating this difference, of course, is that it'll depend upon the choir, and it'll depend upon the night, and it'll depend upon the goals that you have for the choir that night. If, for example, what's a good example? Those sopranos needing to get that G. It's like, okay, then I know I'm going to have to build in my exercises in such a way to help them, the mechanism relax so they can hit that G they're not used to. And I may do warm-up exercises later in the rehearsal before we even get to those Gs to help develop that technique. So that's a way it can be kind of built in. The different conductors do it differently, though, so I do hesitate to speak for all. There are conductors who dislike warm-up exercises at all, and they'll expect you, if you need to, if warm-up exercises help you, they'll expect you to have done it in your car before you walked in the building. Their philosophy is, let's focus on the repertoire, and you can learn how to sing elsewhere, but here we're about the repertoire. And that's fine too, so long as everybody in the choir and everybody in the room accepts that division of labor and division of time. As long as everyone's okay with it, then do it that way. There are some conductors who will devote a lot of time on vocal technique to the detriment of the repertoire. I have been accused of that. And sometimes the accusation was accurate and sometimes it wasn't. But it becomes subjective to a particular point.
There was one more question, but I have a suspicion it will go with your next slide, which is, how do you choose your battles when a concert date is fast approaching? This is a very good question.
It's an extraordinary question.
Looking forward to your answer on this one, Dr. Cannon.
The answer, there are three answers that come to mind: carefully, quickly, and badly. And all three of them will happen. So I mentioned, for example, my run-through rehearsal that I do, and other conductors will do things similar. So I have one sheet of paper where I have in my little shorthand the top priorities for any given piece that I think need to be worked on. And that sheet of paper is my guide for all of the rehearsals that follow, until every single piece, every single line has a check mark by it. And I still have to go back to the things that were checked. So you kind of have to choose, oh boy. So that's why I say carefully. It takes thought. The second aspect of quickly is, very often it'll be a matter of what can you get away with? What are your top priorities? You have to be able to get through the piece. You have to make sure it sounds half decent. And so this is going to be the thing that'll get there. And so sometimes the decision is not complex, but it's demanded in a particular way. Or, for example, if the time of each rehearsal is approaching, you may just find that you don't have as much available to you, and you'll have to then choose what to do and what to let go. This chord is not going to be in tune. This French vowel, I'm going to let it go. And because perfection is difficult. And then the third reason I say badly is because it will be imperfect. It is impossible to actually do truly accurately. That's true whether you have professional musicians or whether you have music that all of the choir has already sung before. There will be imperfections in that process. What a great question. Oy vey. There are other considerations, and while the conductor is trying to deal with this last minute, oh my God, wait, this French vowel isn't right, already there's an increase in other logistical activities as you're getting closer to the concert. As in this dating, you're preparing for an important step, whatever that step may be. Some of the variables will deal specifically with the venue, like you'll be involved in how early can you get into the venue to set up the stages, because you're the only one who knows how the orchestra needs to go. Or you're the one who's going to have to indicate where we're going to stand if it's an unfamiliar venue. You'll be the one determining, you, the conductor, will be the one determining where people stand. If you're lucky, your rehearsal venue will match your concert venue well enough that you can just transfer the way that people are going to stand. It ain't going to happen very often, though, unfortunately. There are things that you're doing as the conductor to interact with the audience, like writing program notes, one of my very favorite tasks, and or giving a pre-concert lecture. And you'll also probably have some kind of mid-concert spoken remarks. Maybe somebody else will do the speaking. Maybe it'll be you. Maybe you won't do that at all if it's not your style. And you'll be dealing with things like the inevitable question, what do we wear? What does a conductor really do? Probably pass that buck on to somebody else to answer, or at least that's what mine usually, or just make it as simple as you can. Concert etiquette thing. Yes, the conductor will be the person who will be asked multiple times on which side do I hold the music folder. There will be questions about attendance of if somebody misses a certain number of rehearsals, are they still allowed to perform in the concert? And that will only be answered on a case-by-case basis, sometimes, usually, perhaps. But you're also, especially at this point, preparing for the future, what will happen after this concert. The conductors probably started studying the scores somewhat for the next concert because they have to do things like hire their instrumentalists or soloists several months in advance. And the whole long while, you'll be recruiting singers or auditioning singers or auditioning soloists, those kinds of things. I think I mentioned once upon a time that I generally like to plan my concerts in a slow process over about 2 or 3 years. So you're still planning repertoire for future seasons. You'll be starting the budgeting for the next season and working on marketing perhaps as well. And the conductor has their own professional development so that they improve themselves as a conductor. They're attending conferences, other networking activities, local meetings, or elsewhere. They're doing their own research, perhaps about music history, perhaps about the art of conducting itself. Perhaps they're researching new repertoire or other things. And then very few conductors actually make their whole living from conducting. There'll be some freelancing like substitute conducting. Maybe they teach, perhaps even at university, or voice teaching privately or piano. Perhaps they're a composer as well. They may write as I do also. They may lecture. There are all kinds of different things to do. And that brings us to the concert. And on concert week, as for many singers, and just like with the theater, the mindset shifts entirely. There will still be all those things that have to happen from that last slide, the planning for the future, but really there's a different kind of focus. In the last rehearsals, there will be a greater attention to setting up the stage, especially, as I said, if you have chairs, you're probably the only person in the organization who really knows how many violins are going to be here, who needs their own music stand, who shares a music stand. The rehearsals as you progress, but especially that week, should really focus more on running through things rather than repeating any given section. If they're needing to repeat it at that point, it might be something you just have to let go. Then the concert. The concert is where conductors think of themselves like Bugs Bunny, and giving everything they've got. In a rehearsal, usually a conductor is generally listening with half of their mind on correction, on what they're going to need to fix or address or come back to. And only half their mind at most is on really what's the musicality of what's going on, why this composer was doing what they were doing. In a concert, however, as my old instructor likes to say, you're conducting the angels. You're assuming that everything is going perfectly. And you become, I think of it as the conductor's role as being the conduit between the composer, the score, and the musicians who are making sounds. And they themselves are a conduit heading to the audience or behind the conductor. I'm not going to get into the details of baton technique and cueing and those kinds of things, because that's a whole other thing. If you want to listen on conducting technique, there we go. Can I save us for questions just for a couple more minutes? I'm almost to the end here. I'm looking over to Scott as if you can all know that he's in that direction of me. So the concert has arrived. You met that piece of music. You decided you wanted to try dating them. You planned out your dates. Is it a case of happily ever after? Well, who knows? And when it comes to music, sometimes the relationship ends there. Sometimes after you've had one date or 4 or however many, amicably you decide, this isn't really the thing. And so you go in your different ways and you may never conduct that piece of music again. Sometimes the conductor and music, however, remain interlinked, interwoven for the rest of their mutual lives. There are pieces of music that in the last 10 years, I know I have conducted 4 or 5 times, and I know I will continue to do so because they're magnificent pieces of music. And there's everything in between. So I like to think that even if it's not happily ever after, it's still happily. Because let's face it, music as a whole, if it's a love story, it deserves to have a happy ending, especially in choral music. Even if operas don't get happy endings of love stories, I think choral music can. In summary, then, the 4 primary areas, what I would say a conductor really does. In the category of music, you are selecting the music, getting to know it, you're programming it, you're studying it, you're actually performing it. I didn't write performing. Wow, that's interesting. Maybe that's also, I like to say that's because of quarantine. I'm not thinking about performing so much. A major part of what a conductor is doing is teaching, whether that be training the singers in vocal technique or in the music. It's rehearsing the music itself, and maybe auditioning people as a form of teaching. That's a whole other story. From an organizational point of view, you're attending to fundraising, logistics management, attending meetings of various sorts, professional development. You're doing all kinds of things in the way. I would say that the items that I list as music in the top of the first of those 4 categories, I would say that takes up typically between, it varies from week to week, and composer to conductor and choir to choir. But I'd say typically at most 1/3 of the conductor's time is actually spent with doing the music, directly with the music, as I say. So part of that, where you group in rehearsals is kind of changeable, but even then, rehearsing in a given week is probably about 1/3 to 1/4 to 1/3 of what the conductor is spending on that choir in that week. And there you have it. What conductors really do: a little bit of everything, and some of it's music.
All right.
Let's question.
We had 2 folks come up with the same question.
I better answer it accurately then.
I'm going to try to combine their points so that let's see here. How do you know when to pull a piece from the program? What are your criteria for pulling something after you've programmed it?
You've heard me say many times today, I know, different conductors do it differently. So I make sure that okay. There are different reasons and there are different times, and the reasons and the times may be different. You may discover early on this piece is a poor match for this ensemble. It might be for community reasons, it might be for musical reasons, it might be for you've just realized you've over-programmed and something's going to have to go, so you pick the thing after the 3rd rehearsal. Sometimes that happens. I try not to cut anything until after the run-through rehearsal, when I can really assess the situation. I actually cut very, very rarely, so that's one of the reasons it's a tricky decision, a tricky answer for me personally. If by the time you get to the run-through rehearsal, if it's going to be impossible to even sing through the piece, if you've got 2 or 3 train wrecks in the middle of it, that's where you have to really consider. You have to rethink your programming, whether that's the wisest piece to have. I guess those are the simpler answers, and therefore probably the most accurate.
That's it for questions. That is it for questions.
All right.
All right. With that, if there's no more questions, Gary, anything else? Anything from anybody at all? All right. Well, I will then.
And now that you know what your conductor really does,
right. Thank you, Gary.
have pity on them. No.
Really? We want to thank everyone for being here this afternoon and for all your questions and contributions. We are very gratified to have so many folks that have been attending regularly, and we've had new people each session. So we thank you. We thank you all, and we thank you for your contributions as well. Don't forget that donate link is in the chat if you haven't already donated. You can help create more sessions. I should just do the script, right, Gary? You can help create more sessions of the Emerald Choral Academy by donating at emeraldensemble.org. Our next session will be a panel discussion with Karen Thomas, Artistic Director. I have to do it. Dr. Karen Thomas, Artistic Director and Conductor of Seattle Pro Musica, Rebecca Gilmore, Director of the St. Mark's Choir School and Associate Musician of St. Mark's Cathedral, Gary D. Cannon, Artistic Director of the Vashon Island Choral and Cascadian Choral, and myself, because, of course, our topic will be What is Blend? A hotly debated topic among choral singers and directors alike. Registration is open for this event and available on our website. In the meantime, I'm Scott Kovacs, and on behalf of all of the Emerald Ensemble, I wish you good physical, mental, and musical health. Thank you. And we're out. But with that, we've actually had 2 more questions.
Live long and prosper, everyone.
Yes, absolutely.
I kept myself from doing it during the thing. 2 more questions. Yes.
Yeah, just as I was starting my outro, we got 2 more questions in.
Right, let's do it.
How about hiring additional singers?
Yeah, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. The one choir that I direct, we, by sheer numbers, we almost always hire 2 tenors. We plan on it, we budget for it at the beginning of the season. Sometimes you may discover people drop away because life gets in the way, they can't do a concert for whatever reason, and you bring folks in. The challenge there becomes picking the right singers, and the part of it is musicality, that they need to be able to come in probably on just a couple of rehearsals, because otherwise it's difficult budgetarily speaking. Making sure personality it works. I've hired singers who just kind of walked in and behaved like a professional and didn't really talk much with people around them. And it's not a bad thing to behave like a professional or to be reserved in nature. It just wasn't the right fit for that particular job. And then the other aspect is a matter of vocal color, that making sure they know how to sing in such a way that they will be in the ensemble and not an opera singer who has been hired to happen to sing with these other folks. Sometimes it's a decision you make later on. As I say, recommend having it as early as possible, and eventually just to include it in your budget if you think you're going to need it. And if it turns out your recruitment was great and you've got all the tenors, then don't hire anybody, and hooray, hooray, you've just saved yourself a couple $100 in budget.
The last question, I believe, is how do you balance your various choirs as a conductor when you have multiple jobs? You've got multiple.
Yeah. Carefully, quickly, and badly, usually. It varies from week to week. When one choir has a concert week, the others are going to get neglected. I happen to be very fortunate that the 3 choirs with which I work the most all kind of know that and all understand that. So we plan things and schedule things with that in mind in part. If you have a board meeting with one choir on, say, a Thursday, then you'll probably be doing a lot of preparations for that early in the week. And so then the other choir might get slightly neglected. I've tried so many times to allocate, however many hours, 12 hours a week to each, and reliably, and it never works. It never has. And some people may find that effective, and even if it shifts about every week, they find it useful to have that goal. I just can't manage that myself for whatever reason, evidently. There are some conductors who will devote and this, Scott, you do this with your many working things. They'll devote this entire Tuesday is this choir's day.
Yep.
Thursday is this organization's day, and they're able to have that focus.
I will also admit that that's my intention. It doesn't always work out that way. You know, I have one day is a teaching day, this day is a teaching day, although what I'm discovering for me is that I like to have a split day. I work on one thing in the morning and one thing in the afternoon. To try to keep it's how it's ended up during COVID tide. That's how it's ended up for me. But that's it is. I think the other thing is, you know, we really have to keep an eye on our schedule to make sure that we don't have collisions in the calendar. I know that you know, for me personally, I'm in charge of the calendar for the concert calendar for all of my organizations. So I make sure that my concert events are off by as much as a month if I can, so that I'm not going concert crazy, you know, 7 days apart. It doesn't always work. But sometimes I've got a fundraiser on one weekend and a concert on the next weekend and an outreach concert on the weekend after that. And you have to plan your vacation time very thoughtfully as well.
And then there's the month of December, you know, where everybody will have a choir, especially those quite a lot of conductors, including those who work with community choirs and orchestras, whatever. They also have their church job, and so they've done concerts through early December because that's when people will pay money to go hear a choir reliably, and then they'll also have their church services after that, and it's a tricky time.
Well, we have one more actually. Pros and cons of having a post-concert assessment with choir members.
Careful what you ask for. You might get it. I guess it depends what you mean by post and what you mean by assessment. Post-concert, I would not do it immediately after the concert, like concert ends at 9:30 and let's sit down and talk for half an hour. I think that is destined, even if the things you're going to say are mostly, that should be said are mostly positive, it's destined to be a morale breaker. But if, for example, your first rehearsal after the concert is devoted partly to talking about the concert, what went well, what didn't, then you just have to be careful to make sure you talk a lot about the things that went well and some about the things that didn't, in order, again, for morale. I should have put morale officer in my list of what conductors really do, because it's a huge, huge factor that I neglected entirely. And as when you say assessment, it's good to have a few people in the audience and a few people in the choir who you trust as musicians and as kind people, to whom you can say, how do you think it went? That is very useful, but they, I think, ideally are chosen by the conductor chooses who they want to get the feedback from because they trust them already. And it should be done ideally at the conductor's impetus.
You've gotten a couple of thank yous for the dating analogy too. I just want you to know that people are really relating to the dating analogy. That was a great idea, and I think
it was imperfect, but it was close enough.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, imperfections are. Yeah. Oh, I'm saying this to a conductor that.
I just went on about how imperfections are part of it.
Yeah.
Well,
so
it really was a matter of it gets tricky when you get nearer to the end and you think, oh, am I still sharing? I should not be sharing screen anymore. It gets tricky when you talk about the happily ever after. I was trying to think for quite a while. Well, what is the concert? Is the concert a first kiss? Is it a marriage proposal? Is it consummation? Is it marriage itself? I haven't figured that out for myself yet. So everybody can do that on their own. Yeah.
Well, with that, I don't think I need to do the outro again, but thank you all for hanging out for the last few questions. And we're certainly everyone left in the room are what I would call friends of the family,
Oh yeah,
or family for that matter. So
literally.
we're
Yeah.
glad everyone's here. All right, folks. With that, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you. I'm going to stop the recording.
Oh, good.
Gary.
Of course. We should make sure, since my parents are here, I should say hi to them.
Oh yes. What we'll do is I'll stop
Yeah.
recording, and then we'll bring over your folks to say hi.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.